Okay, I just want to make sure everybody can hear me okay. I am in the car, like I said before we started. This is my office on wheels to get away from all the children in the house. Right before the meeting started, I've got a 15-year-old daughter, and she just texted me to ask if she could eat my leftovers in the fridge. So things are very different today than they were before. I appreciate the introduction, Stephen. You made me sound good. Now I'm going to make myself sound pretty bad. But I'm really, really grateful for AA today, and I'm really, really grateful for sobriety today. The last drink that I had was actually on June the 19th, 2012. But my story began long before that. I grew up in a household here in Kingsport, Tennessee. I've lived here my whole life. I don't know, Stephen, if you actually know where I grew up on Bellmead Drive. My father still lives there. He is getting ready to turn 80 next year. He has taken up skydiving. He's also a recovering alcoholic, and I have permission to share that when I speak about him because our story is intermingled with each other. I grew up in a home where I had a parent who was an active alcoholic, and that was my father. I had an older brother, and I was very close with my mother. We had a very good, tight-knit family, but growing up in the 80s, I was born in 1983. Growing up in the 80s, even in the 90s, you didn't really talk about your family problems. Mental health wasn't something that was really talked about in schools and things like that. I was little sister syndrome. I wanted to do everything my brother was doing. I wanted to compete with him. I had definitely undiagnosed attention deficit disorder as a kid. And that led to a lot of anxiety, a lot of trouble, like expressing myself and dealing with my emotions and things like that. I remember having my first suicidal thoughts in elementary school. I'm talking like first grade, before I was really even able to comprehend what those thoughts meant. It's like I would get frustrated when I couldn't express myself at school. Things were going on with my friends. I wanted my dad to stop drinking. And all I could think about was that it would just be better if I wouldn't wake up. Things like that. So I became really good at things to get positive attention. I've always responded really well to positive feedback when people are proud of me, when I do things well. That's where I get, my sense of self-esteem from. So I started playing tennis at an early age. We were a country club family, so that just kind of made sense. I ended up being a competitive tennis player by the age of 10. And by the age of 12, I was playing in the South. I was ranked in the South. I remember going to watch Serena Williams play in some of her very first matches in South Carolina in Hilton Head. My mother would take me to watch her play, and it was something that I always looked forward to. I had dreams of being a professional tennis player, things like that. My father's drinking worsened to the point where he was taking me to tennis tournaments across town, 4 or 5 hours away, and he was drinking in the car while he was taking me there. I remember almost getting in numerous accidents, being very scared about it, trying to figure out a way to express to my mom how I felt, because I don't know that she knew it was that bad. You know what I mean? It was like he would hide it. And then when we were out of town, when he would drink a lot and things like that. So as I become a teenager, I distanced myself from my father. Those feelings of helplessness turned into feelings of anger and resentment. And I wanted nothing to do with him. I figured if I switched sports, the next logical country club sport, I picked up golf. I thought, well, I'll just play this. And golf was really a spiritual thing for me at the time, because it's, if you play golf, you are there against the course. You're not playing another person, you're playing yourself. And a lot of it's mental. And I would go and escape to the golf course. And that's where I would meditate and play. And I ended up becoming really good at golf. By the time I was a sophomore, I was nationally ranked, and I was playing in the American Junior Golf Association tour. And that was something that, really made me feel good about myself and gave me something to do. And I took pride in that skill that I picked up very quickly. It was right around that time, my sophomore year in high school, that my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that that was completely unexpected. None of us even knew that was going to be a possibility in life. I was in high school. That's just not something you think of as, thinking about your parents not being around. And my mother and I were so close. We went on trips together. We would go to the beach together on a mom-daughter trip every year. We would go to Tybee Island, Georgia. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but it is one of the most beautiful beaches, in my opinion, because it is like unincorporated. There's not anything to do on Tybee Island except go to the beach and eat local seafood, very serene. So my grandmother actually lived there. She had a condo on the beach, so we would get to go and stay with my grandmother, who I'm named after. So my maternal lineage was always very, very close and dear to me. So when the reality sunk in that my mother had breast cancer, my immediate thought, she's going to die tomorrow. That's the immediate thing you think. And I remember sitting in my room, not knowing what to do, not being able to fix it, not being able to think my way out of it. And this thought just popped into my head that, well, why don't I just deal with it like my dad does? You know, because he would go hide and drink and not have to worry about stuff. So I actually went and raided his fridge and stole a bunch of beer and took it back to my room. And the very first time I ever drank, I remember it was because of that. I said, well, I'm just going to forget about this. And I remember cracking open one after another. And they were so cold, I got the ice cream headache, and I just kept drinking. I kept drinking until that feeling sunk in. That very first feeling of having the alcohol in my system. And it was like this light bulb went off in my head that, I tried to do golf, I tried to do school, I tried to do all this stuff, but none of that worked. Alcohol worked. It worked almost immediately. 15 minutes and I already felt different. It was effortless. And for somebody who always worked so hard to like do stuff, for me, that was just like the key. And I was telling somebody the other day at work, it wasn't like a gradual thing with alcoholism. It was immediate. And to me, that is absolute proof. The alcoholic was in me before I ever drank. The mental illness was in me before it ever expressed itself. Whatever, co-occurring disorders go together, and I do believe that's what my situation was. So my brain, that was it. That was the answer. Every night in my room from then on out, I had alcohol. I was storing empty bottles in suitcases in the hallway closets, just hiding stuff wherever I could to get away with it, to hide it. Unfortunately, my mother was very sick when they found out that she had the cancer, and she ended up passing away 2 weeks after I graduated high school. That was, to me, the most pivotal moment in my life, because even though it was something that we thought might happen, my brain wasn't fully developed. I was already an active daily drinking alcoholic, and my mother passed away. So, from there on out, I'll just summarize the next few years pretty quickly, but it went to other drugs, other ways of using drugs. Actually, that started when I was cleaning out her cabinets and things like that after she passed away, and I found all the bottles of medication that she hadn't taken. And back then in the early 2000s, big pharma, this and that, there was plenty of medication. There was way more than anyone needed, even with cancer. So, for the next few years, I was in an absolute blur. And that's all I cared about. I threw away a full scholarship to play golf that I had. I threw away a chance at education, like everything. I mean, I pretty much lived like an animal. I think an animalistic way of living is a good way to put that. I did not care. Alcohol and drugs and other behaviors went with everything that I did. I started getting in some legal trouble not long after that. It was like a month after my 21st birthday was my first DUI. 3 months after that was my second, and I think 6 months after that was my third. So it was just bam, bam, bam. I had absolutely no business driving a car. I put thousands of people at risk. I'm extremely grateful and I'm very lucky that I never hurt another person drinking and driving. But that was, a real possibility in my mind. Even when I was doing it, I knew it was a possibility, but I just didn't think about it, so it wouldn't matter. The things that we do that affect others that we just put on the side burner, we deal with that when we work steps. And I'm grateful for that too. So my early 20s were literally a nightmare. The very first time that I ever went to treatment, I was court ordered. And I didn't know anything about AA. I didn't know anything about rehab, steps, anything like that. I just knew that it was a get out of jail free card. It was much better than sitting any longer in there. I think I had waited 3 months in jail when a bed opened up and I got to go to treatment. And I remember that was the first time that I saw the steps. And there was a big poster on the wall, you know, in the corner of the group room. And I remember looking at them and thinking, you know, just mentally going like, okay, I can do that. I did that. I did that. Not going to do that. I might do that. You know, just going down it mentally, just already determining what was going to work for me and what wasn't. Um, I had a real desire to stay sober at the time. It was a genuine desire to stay sober, but I didn't have the ability, if that makes any sense. So what I did when I got out of treatment, decided I was going to white knuckle it, just be abstinent. Um, and I didn't have a drink again for 3 years and 11 months. So I maintained sobriety, physical sobriety, but I didn't really change anything else about my life or about who I was or what even the problem was to begin with. At that time, I had gotten into a relationship. I am a lesbian, so I got into a relationship with a woman, was dating her for, gosh, like 2 weeks, and she found out she was 2 months pregnant. So I had just met her. She was someone who had let me know she was in recovery. She hadn't done a drink or a drug in 6 years. I thought, ooh, that's magical, you know. So I latched onto her, and we found out she was pregnant. Um, at the time, you know, I wasn't even scared. I really thought, like, okay, if this is what I'm gonna do, this is okay. And I fully agreed to be a mother at that time. And I made that commitment to her and to the child in her belly. You know, the father of the child wasn't in the picture. It wasn't ever an issue. So we ended up having like a commitment ceremony and moving in together right away. And I mentioned before the meeting started, my 15-year-old texted me to see if she could eat the leftovers. That's her. So she is now 15 years old, and that was the best decision that I made as a dry drunk ever. 3 years into that relationship, we weren't compatible. Nothing about me had changed. I wouldn't blame her. I mean, it was just not, the relationship wasn't going to work out. So we broke up. The funny part is, before we broke up, she had paid for us to go on a family cruise to the Bahamas. And that was going to take place like in 6 months or something. And we broke up. And like my first thought was like, well, what are we going to do about this cruise? It's already paid for. Like, I'm going to the Bahamas, you know, especially right after all this. And let me backtrack like 2 seconds and clarify. When my daughter was born, that when she gave birth to our daughter, my father got sober. So that's the big thing. That's when we really started to work on our relationship. We had a very serious talk about, you know, if he wanted to step up and be a grandfather, he would have to do that sober. It was a boundary that I had. It wasn't an ultimatum. It was a boundary, and he chose to go to treatment himself. And he actually went to the same place that I went. And so he has been sober since 2007. So we decided to go, back to the story, we decided to go on the most awkward family vacation you can imagine. It was me, my ex who had just been cheating on me, and that's why we broke up. So that makes it even more awkward. My dad and my 3-year-old daughter. So we go on this family cruise together. And, you know, my intention was that I would use that time for us to sit down and really come up with like a parenting plan and agree on how we were going to share our daughter and work that out. But the moment we sat down to talk together, she said the magic words, which were, I wish you could just have a drink and we could talk about this. And for some reason, the way she said that, it was like the audacity, like, you wish I could have a drink. First of all, you don't tell me what to do. I'll tell you that I can have a drink. You know, it was one of those, like, I'll show you mindsets. And I ended up destroying my period of sobriety out of a resentment against her to prove to her that I could drink. Like, obviously, I could not. It was terrible. It was a horrible trip. The whole time I was hungover, I was trying to hide it from my dad, who had worked so hard on his recovery. I didn't want him to know that I'd just messed up. You know, I was like almost back in that mindset of hiding stuff in the house. I ended up having to move back in with him after that relationship was over. So I really was back into that high school mindset. And I really think that I was still emotionally about that old because I didn't do any work on myself in the meantime. Um, I had lost my license, habitual offender, all that. So I wasn't working, I wasn't contributing to anything. Um, so I spent a good number of years, at least 2 years after that, back to daily drinking. And I did all the justifications that you could do. I thought to myself, well, at least I'm not using needle drugs again. At least I'm not in jail. At least it's legal, whatever I could tell myself to make myself feel better. But the truth was the alcohol and the depression and the mental illness was absolutely killing me. Um, you know, I was 28 years old and I felt like I was 68 years old. I had absolutely no ability to get up out of bed. It was just physically and mentally just death. And that is when I started having suicidal thoughts again. And that is where my disease lives. I know that my alcoholism wants me dead, and it speaks to me through my depression and through my anxiety and my not enoughness and all of those things. And that's the weapons it has. So it slowly ate away to that. I was back to taking different types of medications, not taking them like I'm supposed to, taking too much. I was drinking mouthwash, anything I could get my hands on in the house that, I could hide from my dad. I remember going to Sam's Club and buying a pallet of mouthwash because I knew I could get that in the house and be like, oh, look, I saved us all this money on mouthwash, and then 2 days later, I drank all the mouthwash and had to cover that up with some lie. I laugh about it now, but I mean, it's humiliating. It's humiliating what I did. So the more and more I became suicidal, the more and more I became delusional. I believe I started having seizures in my sleep at that time. I believe also that I was having some withdrawal psychosis. There were days that I would try to go without drinking just to see if I could, and would begin hearing voices and seeing things shoot across the room, and I had not really experienced that before. It was quite scary. The last night that I ever took a drink, I believe that I had a full-on withdrawal psychotic episode because I remember believing that there were people in my house that were trying to kill me, and I could hear them. Oddly enough, they lived in the closet where I hid my bottles. I don't know, but I could hear them, and they were talking about me, and they were saying things that really hit at my self-esteem, and it was literally a manifestation of my disease. And I had about a 4-hour blackout. I really don't remember anything other than hearing the voices and being very, very scared. And then the next thing I know, I have awoken in my bathtub and there is blood everywhere. And I had a knife in my hand. And the first thought when I came to and I looked down and I saw the blood was, oh no, they've done it. They've killed me. I really thought someone had done this to me for a split second until I realized that I still had the knife in my hand. And that's when absolutely all the life in me drained out. I can't explain that any other way. It was almost like a moment of spiritual clarity where I realized out of everything that just happened, absolutely none of it was real. What was real was that I had done that to myself. And I do actually, if this will even show up on your screens, I do have a photograph of what I looked like a few days after. And I cannot tell you what happened. I do not know what I did. I know that I had a hairline fracture on my skull and I had cut myself all to pieces. This was just a couple days after that. Basically spent 4 hours kicking my own ass. And I guess I won. I don't know. But I ended up coming to in a psych hospital. And I remember the feeling of shame when the alcohol and everything wore off and they had given me some medication. I remember the feeling of shame where I realized where I was again. It was over, like the gig was up kind of stuff. Like I knew that I was either at that point I was going to get sober and stay sober, or I was going to figure out a better way to end it all, right? And that's where I was at. So I consented to treatment again, even though I really didn't want to go. I wanted to just go home, and white knuckle it again. But luckily, the doctor at the treatment center was a lot smarter than me, and he knew that I needed to go to rehab again. This time, I went to a women's only facility, and that was something I hadn't considered or didn't even know existed. The first time I went, it was co-ed, and it was just like fun. You know what I mean? This time, it seemed more serious. It was all women. There were people there that were just like me. I wasn't really accepted right away because of how I looked. Like even some of the hardcore girl. I mean, I know I've got tattoos and stuff, but like there were some like hardcore girls that had just got out of jail there that see these bruises on my face and they're like, "Oh, what happened to you?" It took a while for people to actually believe my story. They thought someone had beat me up. Um, you know, so that was where I got my first taste of like what recovery and what the 12 steps really were. The first meeting that we went to was an all women's NA meeting, actually. And that was the first place that really grabbed me. I My main program that I worked is AA and the 12 steps out of the AA book, but I loved this one particular meeting of women because that was the first place that I felt seen, that I felt understood, that I felt like I could share openly. And that was my first home group other than Serenity Improvement Group. When I finally went back there and saw Stephen, I don't know if Stephen remembers this, but I went to a meeting at the Renaissance Center back when you could still smoke in there. And that was like, I think that was before I ever even went to rehab the first time. And he gave me a living sober book, a yellow book. And I remember I stayed sober for like 10 hours that day. And that was the longest period of sobriety that I'd had in years because I sat down and I read this stupid book that this bow tie guy gave me. And, I thought about it. And to me, like that's a seed, even though it didn't take off from there. When I saw him again, like I remembered him and like things like that matter now. I realized that the longer that I'm in the rooms and that I'm in recovery and in the recovery community, people are going to remember stuff I don't remember. We're all going to touch people when we least know that we are. So that was important to me. And I immediately felt at home in the rooms at that point because straight up, I was ready to surrender. Step one, like I had never even gotten there before. So I got a sponsor at the AA group, at Serenity Improvement Group. I had like 90 days sober and I got a sponsor. The first time I asked her, I approached her to sponsor me. I think I scared her. I don't know. She was like this really sweet, kind lady that gave really good hugs. And I just come up to her like, "Oh, you want to sponsor me?" And I was still, very young in recovery. And she was like, "Oh, I don't know if I can." But I didn't give up because I really wanted her to sponsor me. And I waited a little while and asked her again. And she was like, Polly, I was really hoping you'd ask me again because I want to say yes. And I began working the steps at that point with her. One story that I want to share that really made a difference for me. We talk about like burning bush moments, God moments, things like that in early sobriety. Like I can look back and come up with stuff I didn't even realize that was happening then. But my absolute favorite thing that happened was right when I got out of treatment. I just talked about how much it meant to me to be there and this and that. Well, I still ended up getting kicked out because I was very immature in early recovery. I didn't take too well to the rules. I didn't want to wake up on time. I had a very bad language sometimes in the group room. So I got kicked out of treatment on day 11. That's as long as I made it. But what I remembered the most was H&I, was when people from the meetings, the women from the meetings, AA, all of them came to the center and shared their stories with us. That is what made me feel connected. So when I got kicked out of treatment, it was one of those moments too. Again, I'm sitting on the side of the road and I'm like, oh, damn. Okay, what have I just done? Where am I? I know I don't want to drink, but what am I going to do? I looked at my watch and I realized that there was an AA meeting at Central Group, which was like 2 blocks away from where I was in like 15 minutes. So I had time to throw all my stuff. All my stuff was in trash bags. I threw it all behind some bushes and I walked 2 blocks to the meeting. And I remember I wanted to share right away in the meeting about how unfair the treatment center was, how they kicked me out and they shouldn't have, and like all this poor me kind of stuff. And they were so patient. The people in that meeting were so patient, and they let me share, and they nodded and they listened and they smiled. And one of the old timers at the end of the meeting pulled me aside. He's a real cool guy. He had like chaps on, had a motorcycle, you know, he was real cool. He pulled me aside and he was like, honey, you know, pour me another drink. He said, I guarantee you're going to be drunk tonight if you don't do something about that, you know. And the, again, it was like the audacity of that man to tell me that I'm going to drink. I wanted to prove him wrong, you know, so I said, okay, I'm not going to drink. And I didn't. And the next day when I woke up, that is the day that I actually count as my recovery day, because it's the first day that I woke up in my own bed and I wanted to be sober. To me, that day matters. So that's July the 4th, 2012. And I got home and I told my dad, I said, we need to go on a beach trip. Let's go. Let's get my daughter, let's go take a real quick beach trip. He said, okay. You know, he was fixing to retire, so we can go to the beach whenever. And we drove to the beach. And that was my special place where my mom and I would go together. And I went to a meeting out there on Tybee Island. It was a beach meeting. You bring your own chair, you meet at the beach, like right at sunset, put your chairs in a circle. I chain smoked the whole meeting and just listened to everybody share, and just cried. I think I just cried through that whole meeting. And this man, again, a very, very kind old timer, took me aside at the end of the meeting. And he said, you know, honey, you just need some peace. You know, you've got all this built up, like you've got so much going on. And he's like, you just need some peace. He said, won't you pray for peace? And I was like, pray? Because I wasn't there yet. You know, I was like, what do you mean? He said, just ask your higher power for peace. And I said, I don't have a higher power. And he said, sure you do. And he like motioned to like the ocean and everything that was out there. And it was so beautiful. And I was like, holy shit, you're right. Like, this is spiritual, you know? And that the whole time we were there for 5 days. I remember I went out on the beach by myself at night and I just looked up at the stars. You could see every star in the sky. It was so dark out there. You could hear the ocean. It was the sparkling seashells on the sand. And I just prayed out there to whatever for peace. Wasn't real sure what it was, but I felt good. I slept well. I had hope. I woke up with motivation the whole time we were there. On the very last day, my daughter, who was 3.5 at this time, wanted to climb the lighthouse. Now, I still felt like absolute hell. I was only like 3 weeks sober, maybe, still had bruises on my face. Like I wasn't really quite ready to climb 274 steps, I think it was. But, you know, part of that was also a challenge. It was like, yeah, I'm gonna climb to the top. You know, this is something I'm gonna do regardless of how I feel. And that wasn't like me in active alcoholism. So that was some really good motivation that I had. And I remember we were waiting in line for the lighthouse. And there was a bunch of people there. It was like Girl Scout Day or something. And there was a big long line. And we were just standing there waiting. And my daughter's like walking around and I'm chasing her around. And all of a sudden I saw a cat. And the cat was sitting on the ground in the shade right below this building that was connected to one of the lighthouses or whatever. And I was like, oh, hey, let's go pet that cat while we wait. Because I love cats. Cats, I have 2, and I've always had cats as a little girl. So we went over to pet the cat. And on Tybee Island, if you've never been to that lighthouse, there are brick pathways that connect all the buildings together. And they have like inscriptions in them, like you can donate bricks and have like your business can have a brick with an inscription or whatever on it. And when I went over to pet the cat, I leaned over and like all of a sudden it was like everything around me went blank. The hair on my arm stood up. I started crying, like I was shaking. I couldn't talk. I couldn't say what was going on. And my dad comes over and he's like, oh my God, what's going on? And I'm just like pointing. And there's an orange cat, and right above its back, the brick that it's laying on is my mother's name. out of all the hundreds, maybe even thousands of bricks on that pathway, was a brick that said, "In honor of Vicki Reddick," and that is my mother. And here's the picture, because it was like, this isn't real. Like, I took a picture of the cat and my mother's name, and that led me to that. And you know, in that moment, I don't think I had ever known what peace felt like until then. And I had spent all the whole time we were there praying for that. Like, I still, like, finding that brick saved my life. Praying for peace, trusting a higher power, going to meetings, getting sober, like just getting out of bed, like that step one, led me to that brick. And the whole time we were on that trip, in my mind, I thought, and I didn't tell anybody this for a long time, but I thought either I'm going to stay sober or I'm going to find a better way to kill myself. And that was what I had determined was going to be the outcome for my life. And when I found that brick and I felt peace, was probably the first time in my whole life I had ever believed in a higher power. And like, nothing that happens in my life right now can ever take that away, you know? So when I came back to Kingsport from that trip, that was when I did 120 meetings in 90 days, worked the steps with a sponsor, started doing like service commitments, even really early in recovery, whatever it was I could do, I wanted to do. I made it my life. Like, I wanted to learn all about the program. I wanted to learn all about the history of the I wanted to have a sense of value again in my life. And that's what that program did for me. Sorry, that's crazy. The car just shut off. Shit. That's okay. My phone still works. Anyway, from that moment forward, I made, let me see if I can have this on without the car shutting off. There. Technology. So that was 10 years ago, just about. Since then, I have had loss in my life. I have had things I never thought I would have. I got married. I met a person in recovery, and we've been married now coming up on 8 years. And we have another daughter now. I had our youngest daughter 4 years ago, and she is like I said, she is the absolute spitting image of me, attitude and all. So I'm learning again, what it's like through her to have that wonder as a child again, to have that, to be able to teach her how to navigate through life. All the things that I wish that someone had done for me when I was little and I was having feelings like I was. Because here's the thing, either of my daughters could very well become alcoholics. Either one of my daughters could very well struggle with mental illness and other things like that. But because of my recovery and the spiritual principles that I've learned by working the steps, there is absolutely nothing that life can throw that we can't handle, and I truly believe that. I absolutely believe that. I'm very, very grateful, beyond grateful for this program and for the women that showed me how this program works. Um, the, you know, the last sponsor that I had passed away a few years ago, but she was a firecracker. I know Stephen remembers Marty, and I think about her a lot, and I honor her with the work that I do. I work for a nonprofit recovery center, and I'm actually a manager now. I manage the Crisis Walk-In Center. So people come in off the streets in that moment, full of shame, full of rage sometimes, wanting to surrender, needing to know what to do next. And for me to be able to be that person that can offer them the compassion, and the resources, to know the resources, and give them a meeting list, give them a phone list, just let them know that it's possible, just period. I mean, I can make it complicated and I'm good at that, but I can also make it simple and just love people, and that's what that's what I remember the most about what people did for me early in recovery, was just to love me. So I know we are close to running out of time and to do the end readings and stuff, but I think just the most important thing for me is to remember all those moments of surrender and all those miracles, and even the things that didn't seem like miracles at the time, like the pain, being locked up, stuff like that. I'm so grateful for those experiences because it helps me connect with people that are experiencing that today also. So, you know, sobriety is a big deal for me, and recovery is even bigger, practicing it in my life and living the principles of the steps and working them continuously is what gives me purpose. And I'm really grateful to be here, and I really appreciate you asking me to share tonight, Stephen. Thank you guys for letting me be here.